I'm Steve Armstead with the Xerces Society, and while Adrian's keying up Pam's program, I just wanted to introduce Pam. I've had the privilege, actually, of knowing Pam for decades, actually. We both were interested birders way, way back when, and I slid off the bird path a little probably quicker than Pam because I quickly found interest in butterflies, but I'm excited that Pam eventually got there, that she realized as she was out, honing her photography skills and going out with some local individuals who were, strong butterfliers themselves, she took an immense number of photographs, but then realized, boy, butterflies are cool, but then wait a minute, there's these other scaly winged insects that are really cool and probably less known. And so that's where her vision and her sights have gone to. You've seen by the fact that she's prolific a naturalist, that she has her photographs in a lot of different books to, sharing information with all of us. She is actually out doing monitoring of moths. She works with Parks and Wildlife, with Boulder County, with the Nature Conservancy doing studies. And it's just a privilege for me to be able to introduce Pam Piombino because she's gonna give us a little bit of light into that darkness, the pollinators that are working in the middle of the night when most of us are probably not, but yet that hidden world is something we should all learn more about. Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Steve.
And if you'd rather walk around, you can turn this one on. Totally up to you. Or stand here.
I think I can stand here and then see the slide. Thank you. Well, like Amy, I too am a bug nerd through and through and through. The harder I look, the more delighted I am, and the more I appreciate the amazing diversity and importance of a healthy web of life. So I'm gonna hope that I work this okay. So I've decided to become a moth influencer. This is very difficult for me because I have zero presence on social media. So I'm going to have to rely on you all to spread the word, to understand how many gorgeous moths there are and what their very important roles are in pollination and as food at the very base of the food web. So I'm going to show, like Eric did, how to tell the difference between butterflies and moths, how important their diversity is, what other animals rely on their abundance, what important pollinators they are, and threats to their continued role in healthy ecosystems. Oops, knew I'd do that. Okay, everyone knows and loves the butterflies. Who can miss them amongst the flowers with their gorgeous colors? They're not always the best pollinators. With their long legs, they stand well off pollen surfaces, and their proboscises are not near as thick as some of the moths for moving pollen around. I pulled a few ads from different catalogs for plants online. Do we see moths mentioned? Not a one, not a one. The evening primroses are pollinated by moths, but here we have butterflies feasting on them. What does that mean? Okay, I'm going to show you some of the variety of moths in Colorado. These are all taken from within the state. They are every bit as diverse and beautiful as the butterflies, and there's a hell of a lot more of them. Now, like the wasps, moths get a bad rap too. And some of it's deservedly so, I must say. I've had experience with the darn clothes moths. It's a pretty little moth, but oh my gosh. Your Indian meal moths that find all your dry goods oh so very yummy. The tent caterpillars, yeah, they can pretty much strip a plant. The plants will generally come back. We've had a lot of moth activity on some of my hackberries in the yard, and the first round I let them strip a lot of leaves. The second round I hose some of the caterpillars off and let them go to the ground to feed something else. Who hasn't had a little extra protein in their apples? Okay, so what does Lepidoptera mean? It's Greek for scale wing, lepidos and pteron. I love these scanning electron microscopes. Oh, they're so fine. But the scales on moths serve a lot of very, very important functions. And the color and pattern, of course, warmth, they're night flyers. They're not relying on the warmth of the sun to warm up those flight muscles, so let them take off. The water repellency, I was privileged to go to a very famous moth site in Malaysia a couple of years ago, and it was pouring buckets. I mean, it was just incredible how hard it was coming down, and the sheet was absolutely covered with moths. They didn't seem to be very fazed by the water. They can absorb bat sonar clicks, detach to escape spider webs and bird beaks, very important for pheromone dissemination, vehicles for pollen distribution. Okay, so what are the differences? Butterflies are primarily day flying, very few night flyers. Moths are primarily night flying. There are quite a few that do come out during the day, but most of them are out at night. There's different antennae styles, and I have a couple slides that will go right to with that. They're heavier bodied overall. Again, this is a function of warmth at night. Smoother scales, fuzzier. Do you like that very technical word, fuzzier scales? The butterflies are generally quite bright colored until you get into the Hesperidae or skippers. And the moths, there are a lot of muted colored moths. The subfamily or subtribe Nectuinae make me nuts with their very similar patterns and colors. So I mentioned they mate by pheromones, and the pheromone distribution, both male and females, and they can pick up a molecule of scent from a female from miles away. It's absolutely amazing the low, how low the amount of pheromones in the air can be for the male to find the females. There's difference in the cocoons, and the last word, frenulum, with the heavier bodies on the moths, they have a hook between the forewing and the hind wing to make flight easier because of that heaviness. Okay, so here's, I want you to look at the clubbed antennae. They look like little matchsticks to me. And when you look at things on your plants and go, ooh, I'm not sure if that's a moth or a butterfly, start here, start with the antennae. And then the moths have amazing variation in their different antennae. Almost all my photos are going to be from when I light at night. These are all special lights in the UV range that we're not aware of, but the moths can see and are attracted. I also get a lot of other very interesting insects that come to these lights when I'm surveying or censusing, and I do take pictures of everything. I love iNaturalists. I can sing their praises to the sky, and a lot of people say, oh, there's too much garbage on there. You have to remember what their mission statement was to engage people in nature. For that, they should win the Nobel. There's just thousands and thousands of people all over the world now contributing to the site, and every year the amount of papers that cite them in research, scientific papers, has just gone, the curve is straight up. So use iNaturalists, get on there, look around, so much to see. Okay, I'm going to just go through some of the moths that are, for the most part, quite common here in Colorado. And I want you to understand, they're not all these little brown jobs. On the head of that acanthustis is the tail end of a doodlebug, or what is the other name for doodlebug? Help me. Antlions, those little conical traps. This is the adult stage. This green is one of the few day flying of the emeralds, and we have quite a few in Colorado, and one is prettier than the other. There's very few that have common names. So I have to use the Latin for all my reports. I, quite frankly, don't even bother learning the common names, if there are ones. This is not a wasp. In the family Sessaidae, just amazing camouflage, warning colors. Bird's probably not going to take that one. These are found in the winters in bat caves where they overwinter. Another beauty. I find this at all elevations here in Colorado. On the left, that is the caterpillar of this Synchlora, and it's covered itself with leaves or petals of the Achillea. And I've actually got another picture of one off of Agostiki that's purple. So it's really cool camouflage there. Eye spots are flashed to warn off predators. These are generally more higher elevation. This one, really interesting, that it was the first now of several that have been proven to be able to jam bats' echolocation system. People are probably most familiar with this one because it's big. It's almost 4 inches. They tend to hang out on people's buildings, the black witch. Another just beauty, mid-elevations, Colorado. This one introduced to help control leafy spurge. They're much more common farther north. I've just run into this a couple times. I am so thrilled these are breeding in my yard for the last 3 years now. And they're one of the caterpillars that really took out a lot of leaves from the hackberry. I'm happy to share. Okay, the woolly bear. How many of you are aware of what the moth looks like after that pupates? Okay, what's a commonality of all these pictures with that moth? Yell it out if you know it. It's a gaillardia, that's right. Look at how the moth is oriented for color. The yellow head is always pointed at the petals to make it less obvious. And of course, this is helping pollinate the gaillardias. I find a few at lower elevations, but mostly around 8,000 feet in Colorado, Boulder County. I had stunning moths. I did some work for Parks and Wildlife at the new Fisher Peak State Park. Amazing. A lot of pristine habitat in there. Really lovely. Okay, this is, and Amy touched on this, this is just one of the most important things to understand about moths and their role across every environmental service they do, which is there's a hell of a lot more moths than there are butterflies. And they're being identified at about 1,000 new species a year. Oh, yes, a lot of them are tiny and brown. But they're still pollinating, and they're at this point about 10-to-1 moths to butterflies, but scientists and lepidopterists think it could go to 20-to-1. Why is this important? This has been touched on before by Dr. Patch. They're primary consumers of the energy of the sun via photosynthesis, and working its way up food chain, and up there by the eagle should be a picture of humans too. Okay, I'm going to digress just a little bit here. One thing I don't think is stressed strong enough is the emphasis is why native plants are so important. Many moths and many other insects simply cannot utilize the chemicals in plants with which they didn't co-evolve in a given area. So you really want to look at native species, and the works to explore this further, and so much better than I can ever say it, Dr. Doug Tallamy, who I know has spoken here in the past, but his work and he has several books out, probably half a dozen now, and some really good presentations on YouTube that go into detail all the research is done and why you want to plant natives that are local to your area in your gardens. I have gardens in my yard. I probably have about 1,000 square feet, and I do have some that are not native, but I'm out there all the time with my camera, and I can see which ones the native wasps, the native flies, the native everything are on. So there are some really good ones that can be brought in that do perform the ecological services. Oh, I also want to mention that I'm very impressed with what Harlequin's Garden is doing up in Boulder. Their selection of natives has been absolutely awesome, and I don't have any financial interest in them. Mr. Bronner's here. Do I get a discount now? Okay, so who eats moss? We've got lots and lots of birds. And Ptolemy goes into so much about how the birds rely on the specific nutrition in caterpillars to raise broods. Lots and lots of other insects, spiders. That's a mature antlion, if you've never seen one, on the top right there. The wind scorpions are just so cool. This is a fly species, Mantispidae, and it looks like a praying mantis, except for it's a fly. The rodents, the toads, I can't tell you how often I have to shoo them away from my sheets because they will eat dozens of the moths that come in before I have a chance to photograph them. Dr. Rick Adams, of course, from CU Boulder, is the expert on bats. In Colorado, he has confirmed about 30 species. 12 of those eat primarily moss, and 4 only moss. This is a flammulated owl, photographed by owl researcher Scott Rashid, and they primarily beetles and moths, and even grizzly bears, which is just amazing. But they are found on the talus slopes, especially in Yellowstone, and the moths will go into the rocks during the day to wait for dark to approach, rest up, and the grizzlies will be up all over those slopes, pulling it apart, ripping them with their great strength, and eating between 10 and 20,000 a day. Okay, so I was so lucky to find this photo, and the man, Tim Crabb, was a doll to let me use it. In the past, most moth pollination has been about obligate species, which means species that co-evolve where one cannot really live without the other. So the most famous was Darwin's orchid. In the 1860s, someone sent him a sample of this plant. He immediately surmised, after noticing that the pollen was way down at the tip, that there had to be a pollinator with a tongue that could reach it. 20 years later, here we go. That's a tongue, 12 inches. 30 centimeters. Another famous is a tegaticula moss that when you have blooming yuccas or yuccas, one cannot live without the other. And she is so specialized. The male and female moths close or come out of their pupas at the same time, breed, and then she goes to the flower and has special mouth parts in which she collects pollen balls. She tucks under her chin and then flies to another yucca plant to assure cross-pollination. How do they know this? This is amazing. She actually takes little pollen balls and stuffs them into the stigma and then lays her eggs. And after the caterpillar hatches, they do not eat all the seeds, so ensuring that we have another generation of yuccas. Another famous example was Gary Nabhan, and I noticed that Amy had a reference to his book, The Forgotten Pollinators, who in the early 90s, before people were doing a lot of DNA work on pollen, sat around all night on the border of Arizona and New Mexico, seeing how these were pollinated. And he found very, very poor pollination because just over the border, every 8 days they were spraying crops. And he coined the term about chemically induced habitat fragmentation, which, I could have the most organic garden, but my neighbor across the road is spraying all the time. It doesn't help. But these gorgeous Piniocereus, thankfully, there are other populations of them in the Baja and farther south in Mexico, so they're not internationally endangered, but there's very few ever found now along the border in Arizona, and they're also under horrible pressure from collectors. I went into iNaturalist for pictures, and I found one. And if anyone uses iNaturalist, something like this, people would be so thrilled to post. There'd be dozens if there were the plants. They're pollinated by two of the hawk moths. Here's Manduca sexta, quite common around here. And you might not be so fond of it in a minute. Also by Hyles lineata, which is pretty much the moth people see because it's a day flyer, it's good size, it's pretty. But I want to notice make a note that you see other hawk moths in your garden. They're not all pollinators because some of them do not have feeding mouth parts. There's about 30 species in Colorado, and they're not all going to help. But they're beautiful additions. Okay. So, said not all of them are going to pollinate. Their long tongues reach deep into flowers. They're really like tubular flowers. They fly very, very fast. I understand our armed services are using their flying skills to help chart the best way to get through trees. And they cover really big distances because they are such good flyers, visit lots of plants over the course of a night, and cross-pollinate, which always is key to health and diversity for plants. Now these are your tomato hornworms, which I had a neighbor one time look at when I picked off my tomatoes, and he said, "That's a snake. Are you sure that's not a snake?" They grow so big. They also prefer, in my gardens, I see them all the time at night, the datura, the lilacs, the desert fourcock or myriabilis, and here are some of the other plants that bring them in. Okay, why are they such good pollinators? See that furry chest and abdomen, scaly, fuzzy? pollen easily adheres to those surfaces, and they do not stand up and over the flowers as much as a butterfly will, but instead, like flowers in clusters where they sort of lay across it, with some of these with shorter tongues to get to the nectars. They also, the proboscis, a lot of pollen can adhere to those as well. Okay, so most of the recent research has been done in England. And I had looked and looked and looked for papers or studies in the US, and I finally saw one in Connecticut. And so it was a YouTube presentation. I put it on, and within the first 3 minutes, this gentleman was referring back to the English studies. So there's so much work that needs to be done in the United States for moth ecology. So they wanted to study how bees and moths interact. They had plots 3 times during the season. They would net and collect all the moths and the bees, euthanize them, and then do pollen analysis with DNA metabarcoding, which is a much more reliable and faster way than an individual counting and parsing pollen grains under a SEM, or a scanning electron microscope. They were blown away by the results. All through the paper, or several papers that they've written on this, is, wow, we had no idea. They visited so many types of flowers. They visited a lot of the same flowers that bees visited. There was this, as Dr. Patch said, this built-in redundancy, fail-safe systems, incredibly important to the health of our flowering plants. So 55% were carrying pollen, and they were gobsmacked. That's a British term, by the way, gobsmacked. They were pollinating a lot of commercial crops that they had never realized they had visited before, especially the stone fruits, your cherries, your apricots, and things like rapeseed, which is the base for canola oil. Okay, the moths traveled farther than bees too. Anyone guess why? The bees are tied to specific nest sites. The moths are more tied to the larval food for their young. So they will fly all over looking for the appropriate plant on which their young can eat and thrive. Again, some of the chemicals and a lot of the plants that are out there, they cannot use. Okay, so here's some of the kinds of flowers they like. Tubular, darker, lighter shades of pink and white, and some reds. And a key there, and I think as gardeners, a lot of you are probably aware of, you see flowers fading as the day goes long. It's probably to attract moths at night. They also like highly scented, something like the datura, which has just filled a room with beautiful perfume. Some other moths as they work the flowers. And other tests that the Royal Entomological Society has done, over 37 years of data, they set out, I think it was 127, 137 traps all over the country in all kinds of different habitats. And here's the trends for moths. It was uneven by habitat, but overall it's down 31%, which is frightening. So just like every other insect, there's a lot of commonality with what is working against them. Of course, climate change, artificial lighting at night is huge. Please don't leave your lights on overnight if it's not necessary. pesticides, habitat loss, invasive plants, non-native plants in urban areas, grazing animals, deer, elk, cows. And especially in the United States, there's a huge lack of any long-term studies. And I decided to concentrate on moths, although I like lots of different insects, because it was an area I could tell had a lot of need for someone like me who, I'm not an expert, I'm not trained, but I have an abiding passion and I do my best to document what's out there. So I'm pretty much doing studies that just show presence, can't even show absence because we don't know what was there. But it's some really needed and very much appreciated baseline work. So this is the one that drives us all nuts in the spring. You saw Oxylaris, yes. And incredibly important food source. How many of you are birders here? We got some birders in the office, yeah. Did some of you come up to Boulder? Must have been 2 or 3 early springs ago, and there were long-billed curlews all over the fields to the sort of center east of Boulder. They were eating the larvae from these guys. They do long-distance migrations from the fields in Kansas and eastern Colorado up into the mountains, where they summer, put on weight, and then they fly back to breed and repeat the cycle again. Yes, they love to get in our chimney, and then they're always exuding something that just goes right down the front of the fireplace, and you can't take it apart to clean it. So when you visit me, excuse that. But the next time you visit a field of stunning wildflowers in the high country, tip your hat to the noctuidae that are up there pollinating. I want to thank my husband, Joe, and all the other scientists and photographers that have helped me put this together. And here's a few references and resources for you to follow up on if you're interested. But they're not all brown, they're not all eating your cashmere. Thank you so much. I'll stay here. Can I take any questions?
And do you know, is the migratory habit of moths like the miller moth, or is that unique? Just like the miller moth that does that?
No, there's several species that do migrate, but certainly in Colorado, those are by far the most common and most obvious because of the way they do get into our houses and our cars. Have you all seen during the early summer, late spring, all the birds that are working the traffic lights, back and forth, back, they're going after the miller moths. And sometimes you'll see someone roll down their window, a moth will come out, and the bird's right on it. Any other questions, please?
Toxic moths that you're probably familiar with, that their larvae feed on loose moose and the Douglas fir. The females have reduced wings. Kind of
Yes, that's what Aurigias.
Is that,
Yes.
common among moths, and what's the evolutionary advantage?
I think in Colorado, there's probably half a dozen species. I repeat the question, I'm sorry. She's asking, there are some moth species where the females are wingless, and wherever they're born, they just sit there and eat until they're ready to breed, and the males have to find them. So I would imagine the evolutionary advantage would be staying in one spot, pretty well hidden, and that's the most common ones are the family Aurigia, and they're really quite common. So I would think however they've worked it out in an evolutionary sense, it works well for them. So, that's a very interesting question. Way up in the back.
Is my neighbor's horrible bug zapper killing the moths?
Oh, yes, oh, yes, oh, yes, yeah. They kill everything. You know, if it attracts insects, it's meant to kill them. And I didn't manage to talk a friend into taking down his wasp zapper or trap and try to show him how important they were. But yeah, I don't know if you can possibly, you know, this probably is going to go online. Maybe you can show them some of these programs.
They generally kill a lot more than just moths.
Yeah, Scott is a dear biologist friend here. He says they kill a lot more than just moths. Any other questions? I see one over here.
Is this last reference a good place to find where it says host plants for butterflies and moths? This is for the larval form?
Well, they're, you know, where they nectar on and collect pollen isn't necessarily where they're going to lay their eggs. So it's specific from species to species. They're like the real common, I'm just going to use this as a butterfly, but the painted ladies, they'll lay their eggs. God, I've seen them lay their eggs on rocks. So they're just all over the place, and I imagine it's the same, but an awful lot of it is there's a lot of host specificity, so they need to find the exact right plant, and a lot of this just isn't known. Moths are underappreciated, not hardly ever mentioned, are not included in long-term management plans. This needs to change. 10 to 1, moths to butterflies, 10 to 1, at least. So.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thanks so much.